Good morning. Oh, we can do better, my friends. Once more, with feeling, good morning. That's better. Well done. Glad to hear we're all awake in here. Thank you for traveling here, whether from across Peachtree Street or from across the country. My name's Adam Sparks. I'm a partner at Crevlin & Horst here in Atlanta and the outgoing co-chair of the Georgia Lawyer chapter. We're so happy to welcome you here today. On a personal note, and as a proud graduate of Oconee County Public Schools and the University of Georgia, go Dogs, I know I'm amongst friends here today, but more importantly, I know I'm amongst friends because the American Constitution Society has been an important part of my legal and personal life for nearly 20 years now. ACS friends from law school populate my referral network and my holiday card list alike. The first case I brought into my firm actually came from the colleague who served as the ACS chapter president back in law school, and now I send his baby's presents nearly 20 years later. I traveled to DC for conventions going back to the Bush administration. I say all this because there's a lot of young folks here today, there's a lot of students here today, and I want to encourage you to continue to invest your time and your energy into these relationships, into these ideas, into this movement, because I promise you the investment will pay off in the future. Now, our next speaker. Our next speaker is a rock star. A former House Judiciary Committee staffer, a 2017 graduate of Yale Law School, and until accepting her current position, an associate professor at my legal alma mater, few in public life have drawn as many accolades for their leadership from advocates for such a wide variety of ideologies. Her office's efforts to reinvigorate antitrust enforcement to prevent market power concentration and monopolization, to protect workers by providing greater freedom and prosperity alike, to ensure consumer access to fairly priced health care and food, and to raise up free and fair competition in a vibrant marketplace, these all find broad support across the divides that elsewhere seem ever wider and challenging to cross. These policies that benefit all Americans in a modern world are a scarce and treasured source of agreement in modern life. Taylor Swift asked for Lina Kahn pajamas for Christmas, is what I'm saying. The Georgia State motto is wisdom, justice, and moderation, and our speaker, in my view, mobilizes exceptional wisdom to seek justice for all by moderating the more destructive, exclusionary, prejudicial, oligarchical, imperial, power-hungry, and just plain wrong consequences sometimes wrought by our economy and our politics. And after a fairly long spell in the wilderness, government-led antitrust actions to enforce the law without fear or favor are back in action because this administration said, we can do better, my friends. I'm excited to learn more about how far we've come and where we plan on going next because, as she said in a recent interview, it feels like her team's work is just getting started. With that, I'm deeply honored to introduce the chair of the Federal Trade Commission, Lina Kahn.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Adam, for the kind introduction. And thank you so much to ACS for inviting me to speak at this year's convention. ACS has long been a leader in paving the way for progressive legal reform, and today they've brought together such a vibrant coalition of law students, attorneys, judges, advocates, and scholars committed to strengthening our democracy and the rule of law. When I first attended an ACS meeting in my 1L year, questions of monopoly power and market structure were not a big part of the progressive legal discussion. Most people were not talking about the dangers of unchecked corporate power or the relationship between that power and other values that we hold so dear, like economic liberty and freedom. Today, I want to make the case that not only are these ideas closely related to one another, but in fact, they are inextricable. Questions of market structure, like whether a single gatekeeper controls a market or whether instead we have vigorous competition, shape the way that Americans experience freedom and exercise their rights every single day. This idea has been a fundamental part of the progressive tradition in America, going back all the way to the very beginning. Thomas Jefferson wanted to restrict monopolies in the Bill of Rights. He proposed it in a letter to James Madison in the same sentence where he suggested freedom of religion and press. Madison agreed, writing back, "Monopolies are sacrifices of the many to the few." 150 years later, President Roosevelt spoke to the Democratic National Convention about America's long history of fighting for freedom against the privileged and the powerful, and the need for a new revolution against the economic tyrants that had consolidated control over Americans' property, their money, their labor, and their lives. Political equality, he said, is meaningless in the face of economic inequality. Today, we have a president who embraces this tradition. President Biden has made taking on unchecked corporate power a core pillar of his economic agenda, because he understands what progressive leaders have understood for the last 250 years, that economic liberty is the foundation for so many of the values that we hold so dear. It's directly tied to our First Amendment rights, like freedom of speech and press, directly tied to workers' rights, like freedom from coercion and the right to organize, and it's deeply tied to the right to privacy, like the freedom to live our lives without government surveillance or intervention. Let's begin with the First Amendment. Freedom of speech and press are two of the most foundational rights in America, the right to express yourself and speak truth to power. But far too often, the marketplace of ideas is hamstrung by the actual marketplace. All too often, market consolidation means that people become afraid to speak out. When your livelihood is dependent on a single company, be it as a small business owner, a worker, or a farmer, that economic dependence can infringe on your political rights. That fear is front and center for people across the country. The FTC has heard, for example, from anonymous franchisee owners who won't tell us their names or where they work because they live in fear of retaliation. One owner told us that when they suggested changes to make to their own business to make it run more smoothly, they were threatened with an incompliance fee, also known as, they said, a keep your mouth shut fee. And the threat to the First Amendment isn't limited to the workplace. Just take social media, which many consider to be our modern-day public square. But these public squares are privately owned, and the more power they consolidate without free and fair competition, the less room there is for other platforms where users can speak freely and where reporters can freely share their stories. As tech companies consolidate, a handful of billionaires in Silicon Valley are amassing the power to shape public discourse by picking and choosing which voices get heard and which voices are silenced. Users from across the political spectrum are being shadow banned or having their accounts disabled with no recourse to prevent them from saying things that those tech moguls or their friends don't want to hear. It's a slippery slope from consolidation to censorship, and freedom of speech hangs in the balance. This consolidation is part of why the FTC is suing Meta for antitrust violations. We believe that by acquiring WhatsApp and Instagram, Meta unlawfully monopolized social media. And our lawsuit seeks to open that market back up, giving people more places to be seen and heard, and giving writers and reporters more channels to distribute their stories. We've seen similar types of consolidation in the ad tech space and media industry. As one TV writer told us, this tiny group of companies control what we as creators are allowed to say and what messages the public has access to. The writer requested that when the FTC reviews mergers, we ask ourselves, whose voices will this merger silence, and whose stories will the public never get to see? The freedom of press is threatened even further by the mass layoffs of journalists that we are seeing across the industry. More than 20,000 media workers lost their jobs last year, many of them due to market consolidation. This brings me to the next group of freedoms, workers' rights, which ensure that employees are treated fairly, paid equitably, and protected from exploitation. Right now, we are living in a golden era of labor organizing. Over the last few years, workers have made monumental strides, from auto factories in the Midwest to writers' rooms in Hollywood. Workers build power by collectively bargaining for better wages and conditions, and by having free mobility in the labor market, which lets them leave their workplace on their own terms. As chair of the FTC, I've been reminded over and over about how much the market structure can affect the ability of working people to build power and earn an honest living. Non-compete clauses, for example, lock millions of workers into bad jobs and block them from taking better ones. They prevent workers from rising up in the industries that they know best. When the FTC was looking into this issue, we heard from 26,000 Americans across the country and from all walks of life about how non-competes had forced them to uproot their families, forego better opportunities, or face financial ruin. Hundreds of healthcare workers told us about how non-competes had forced them to leave their communities and abandon their patients, sometimes depriving rural areas of critical care. Aspiring entrepreneurs told us about how non-competes had blocked them from jumping into the market, depriving customers of a better product at a better price. In response, the FTC recently finalized a rule that bans non-compete clauses from all employment contracts, because a market where workers are captive to a single company is not a free market at all. As the terrific team at the National Labor Relations Board noted last year, non-competes can even chill workers' right to organize. It's much harder to go on strike if you know that you don't have other employment options. That's the point, of course, to lock you in and keep you quiet. Consolidation plays a part here too. When two competing companies suddenly become one big company, unions can't play employers off one another to secure better terms. That's one reason why earlier this year, the FTC sued to block a merger between two of the largest grocery stores in America. As alleged in our complaint, the commission believed that the merger would prevent thousands of employees from securing higher wages, better benefits, and better working conditions. Finally, I want to talk about how corporate power threatens our right to privacy. The Constitution gives us the right to go about our business without being snooped on by powerful entities. In practice, that means that we should be protected from surveillance, whether it's the government or a private corporation. But commercial surveillance these days is a serious problem. Many companies are vacuuming up consumers' sensitive data and then sharing that data with all sorts of third parties, including foreign governments. That means that a corporate executive somewhere can, without much effort, find out where you live, where you worship, whether you're participating in political protest, and what kind of healthcare treatments you're getting. For example, if you're a woman visiting a reproductive health clinic, a company that owns an app that you've installed on your phone might be able to figure out if you've had, or even if you're considering getting, a sensitive medical procedure, be it abortion or IVF. What's worse, many of these companies can collect your data and then sell it to the highest bidder. Sometimes the bidder is the government, undermining people's privacy and sometimes putting them in serious risk. Companies can just as easily see if you've gone to church recently or to a mosque or synagogue and use that information to discriminate against you. A California county could buy location data to track churchgoers during the COVID lockdown. Law enforcement agencies could do the same to spy on Americans exercising their right to protest. That data can also include visits to domestic violence shelters and addiction recovery facilities, which could seriously endanger people if it got into the wrong hands. 2 years ago, to take on some of these problems, the FTC filed a lawsuit against a major data broker called Kochava. We found out that they were selling people's sensitive geolocation data that they had harvested from hundreds of millions of phones and hundreds of millions of pockets. This data was precise. It showed people's exact location, time-stamped with coordinates. Names, phone numbers, and email addresses were all attached. They were literally tracking your every move. Of course, companies are trafficking in more than just geolocation data. Social media platforms are selling kids' private data, making them less safe online. Digital healthcare platforms are sharing sensitive medical information like health conditions and prescription drugs. And in all of these cases, the FTC has filed suit or taken other action to protect Americans' privacy. Last year, we learned that Rite Aid, the pharmacy, was using facial surveillance technology that incorrectly identified certain customers as shoplifters, mostly women and people of color. These innocent people were followed around and asked to leave the store. Some of them even had the police called on them, including a 6-year-old girl. So the FTC stepped in, and we successfully banned Rite Aid from using this facial surveillance technology for 5 years. This kind of enforcement will only become more important as AI turbocharges surveillance technologies and gives companies new and more efficient ways to track consumers and workers alike. As President Roosevelt put it in that speech to the DNC, when a small group of companies hold all the power, liberty is no longer real. Equal opportunity in the marketplace, he said, is the foundation of democracy itself. It's the foundation of so many of our rights, the ones I've talked about today, the right to privacy, workers' rights, freedom of speech and press, are just a handful. Today, we're going to hear from leaders and luminaries across many areas of law who are fighting for those rights. By taking on private, unchecked corporate power, the anti-monopoly movement is doing that too. So I will close with a request. If you are interested in democracy and freedom, and if you're here at ACS, I know you are, consider joining us at the FTC. We're looking for competition and consumer protection attorneys to join the agency in the fight against unchecked corporate power. The Federal Trade Commission was created to give people a chance to thrive as consumers, as workers, as business people, and ultimately as citizens. It was never part of the traditional partisan framework, and it still isn't. Just the other week, the Wall Street Journal ran an editorial about the importance of protecting AI from being monopolized by the tech giants. It was written by Bill Barr, the former Trump administration Attorney General. In a time of deep partisan division, it's important to remember that there are still issues where progressives and conservatives can see eye to eye. The anti-monopoly movement isn't a battle of Democrat versus Republican or even left versus right. At its core, it's a battle between unchecked corporate power and the power of the people. So as you embark on your legal careers, I encourage you to look for opportunities to work with people across the political spectrum. You may find allies you never knew you had. And when you go back to your law schools and your law firms and your chambers and your think tanks, when you go back to the hard work of fighting for democracy and freedom, remember the threat that unchecked corporate power poses to these core values. Remember that anti-monopoly has been a cornerstone of the progressive movement in America for centuries. And remember that when you defend economic liberty, you are defending all of the freedoms that we hold so dear. Thank you so much.